Jonathan Roumie was moments away from saying 7 words that would alter Oprah Winfrey's life forever, though neither of them expected it. She had just delivered what she believed was the decisive question. One she felt would undermine the man who portrays Jesus on television. Cameras were rolling, 12 million viewers were tuned in, and Oprah was certain she had cornered him with her toughest challenge. But Jonathan's reply stunned everyone in the studio. What were those 7 words that brought Oprah to a standstill? What could the actor known for portraying Christ possibly say that 3 major networks would later attempt to suppress? This is the account of one of the most intense interviews in TV history, when firm faith confronted a billion-dollar empire. And it all began when Oprah made the critical mistake of challenging the wrong person at the wrong moment. 3 weeks earlier, Jonathan Roumie had been in his small Chicago apartment, finishing his morning prayers, when his phone rang with an invitation that would test everything he believed. The voice on the line was Oprah's head producer, offering him a seat on what they called a spiritual enlightenment special, featuring various religious figures and spiritual teachers. Jonathan already knew about Oprah's growing involvement in alternative spirituality, the costly programs, the repackaged ancient teachings marketed as groundbreaking ideas, and the way sacred traditions were turned into high-profit products. He almost refused, but something in his heart told him this was where God wanted him. His apartment reflected the reality of his life. The walls were nearly empty except for a wooden crucifix carved by his Lebanese grandmother, a faded picture of his father, who passed away believing Jonathan would never succeed, and stacks of theology books worn from years of reading. His kitchen table was covered with letters from viewers of The Chosen, people thanking him for portraying faith sincerely in a world full of spiritual imitations. Jonathan had never chased recognition or wealth and had rejected many offers to commercialize his role as Jesus. Yet this invitation felt different, almost like a responsibility he couldn't ignore. As he prepared for the show, Jonathan reviewed Oprah's latest spiritual projects and felt troubled for the millions investing in promises that offered more branding than substance. Her Miracle Mindset Masterclass, priced at $2,000 per person, claimed to unlock divine abundance through visualization and positive thinking. Her partnerships with several New Age teachers had built an empire worth hundreds of millions, based on the idea that spirituality could be bought, shaped, and controlled. Jonathan knew he was stepping into a difficult situation, but he also believed that sometimes people of faith are called to speak truth, even when it costs them dearly. The night before the interview, Jonathan knelt on his apartment floor and prayed for clarity, strength, and the ability to speak honestly but compassionately. He reflected on Jesus overturning the tables in the temple, challenging those who had turned worship into business. He thought of the woman at the well, the tax collector, and the thief on the cross. People who found real hope through genuine connection with God, not through costly programs or hidden methods. Jonathan accepted that this appearance might hurt his career, but some truths he felt had to be spoken regardless of the consequences. When he arrived at Harpo Studios the next morning, he immediately noticed the overwhelming luxury. There were marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and hallways lined with photos of Oprah alongside celebrities and global leaders. The green room was filled with spiritual teachers promoting their newest books or courses, discussing marketing plans and branding strategies with excitement that made Jonathan uneasy. He sat quietly in a corner, reading his worn copy of the Gospel of Luke, while around him others talked about 7-figure book deals and speaking fees large enough to support entire communities. The contrast between them and him could not have been more striking. A production assistant approached Jonathan with a clipboard listing the questions Oprah planned to ask, along with guidance on how to promote his brand during the segment. "Make sure you highlight any books, courses, or products you're offering," she said with practiced professionalism. Oprah's audience loves spiritual content, and this is a great chance to reach that market. Jonathan politely declined the suggested talking points, explaining he wasn't there to promote anything. The assistant looked puzzled, as if she rarely met someone unwilling to profit from a spiritual platform. As the earlier guests went on stage, Jonathan watched from the side as Oprah interviewed several spiritual entrepreneurs who offered everything from instant awakening to guaranteed success. Each appearance felt like a coordinated sales presentation, with Oprah guiding the discussion toward books, programs, and services available for purchase. The audience responded with enthusiasm, clearly seeking hope and meaning, yet being presented with costly alternatives instead of genuine change. Jonathan felt the seriousness of what he was about to communicate, knowing his emphasis on free grace and authentic connection with God would stand out sharply in this environment. When his turn arrived, Jonathan walked onto the stage wearing his father's old navy blazer and carrying only his Bible. No promotional items, no business cards, no marketing strategy, just a commitment to speak honestly. Oprah welcomed him with her familiar warmth, though Jonathan sensed the calculation behind her expression as she prepared for the interview. The audience offered a polite round of applause, but there was a noticeable anticipation in the room, as if they sensed something unusual about this guest. Taking his seat, Jonathan quietly asked God for words that would honor him and serve the people seeking genuine guidance. Oprah began with her standard opening, praising Jonathan's work on The Chosen and asking about his spiritual path in language that sounded deep but remained intentionally broad. "Jonathan, you've touched millions with your portrayal of Jesus," she said in her signature thoughtful tone. "Tell us about the spiritual practices that brought you to this level of consciousness." Jonathan paused, recognizing the New Age framework she was applying to his faith. He understood that his response was important. He could accept her terminology or speak honestly, even if it created distance with the audience. "Oprah, I appreciate the question, but I believe there might be some misunderstanding," Jonathan answered calmly. "I'm not focused on spiritual practices or levels of consciousness. My focus is Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life." The shift in the room was noticeable. Oprah's smile tightened subtly and several audience members shifted in their seats. This was not the broad, all-inclusive spirituality they were expecting. Jonathan continued, "Everything I do comes from my relationship with the living God, not from methods or techniques I've mastered." Oprah quickly attempted to redirect the conversation. "That's lovely, Jonathan. And of course there are many paths to the divine. Many ways to connect with the universal love and wisdom that you call Jesus." Her words were crafted to position his faith as simply one option among many. But Jonathan, after years of studying theology, recognized the subtle attempt to generalize his message. He also understood this moment would shape the rest of the interview. "Actually, Oprah, I have to respectfully disagree," he said, his voice steady. "Jesus said, 'I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.' That's not one path among many, it's the only path." The audience fell silent, aware that something important was unfolding. Oprah's expression hardened slightly, the warmth replaced with a more analytical gaze. She had built much of her platform on the idea that all spiritual routes lead to the same destination, and Jonathan had directly challenged that foundation. "Jonathan, surely you don't mean to suggest that billions of sincere spiritual people around the world are mistaken in their beliefs?" Oprah's voice was controlled but firm. "Isn't that kind of exclusive thinking exactly what people criticize about organized religion?" The question was designed to frame him as rigid or judgmental. But Jonathan had encountered this challenge before, and he understood the difference between speaking truth and speaking harshly. His response could either clarify or alienate, and he silently prayed for guidance. Leaning forward slightly, he replied with genuine compassion. "Oprah, I would never label anyone a bad person because of their beliefs. But truth isn't based on sincerity or good intentions. It's based on reality." He paused, then continued with a simple example. "If my house is on fire and someone sincerely believes water won't put it out, their sincerity doesn't change the fact that I still need water." The illustration was straightforward yet effective, and Jonathan noticed some audience members nodding despite the tension in the room. Oprah's frustration became more visible as Jonathan continued to resist her broader spiritual framework. "But Jonathan," she pressed, "don't you think it's arrogant to claim your religion is the only true one? What about the many wisdom traditions that have helped people for thousands of years?" Her tone took on a slightly patronizing quality, as though she were explaining a subtle concept he had overlooked. The audience murmured, some uneasy with his exclusive claims. But Jonathan had prepared his whole life for conversations like this, even if unknowingly. "Oprah, I'm not saying my religion is true," he replied, his voice firm but respectful. "I'm saying Jesus Christ is true." "There's a difference," Jonathan said. "Religion can easily become another product to promote, another way to make people feel better without truly transforming their lives." His words carried weight, and Jonathan noticed Oprah's expression tighten as she realized his comments applied directly to her platform. The room stayed completely quiet, the audience focused on what had become a serious discussion about belief with major implications. Jonathan understood he was approaching a point that would shift everything. "The Jesus I follow didn't come to start a religion or create an empire," he continued, his tone steady and sincere. "He came to seek and save those who were lost, to offer forgiveness, to give hope to people who felt hopeless. And he offered it freely. No courses, no levels, no hidden knowledge for a select few." The statement lingered in the air, highlighting a clear contrast to the system Oprah had built. She sat firmly in her chair, her public professionalism struggling with her discomfort at being challenged this directly. Every slight change in her expression was captured by the cameras, revealing the effort it took to maintain her composure. Oprah shifted tactics, leaning forward with direct confidence. "Jonathan, let's be honest. You've earned millions playing Jesus on a television series. Isn't it somewhat hypocritical to criticize others for monetizing spirituality when your career is based on it?" The comment was pointed and personal, intended to question his credibility and regain control of the conversation. The audience became more alert, sensing a confrontation. But Oprah had miscalculated. She had challenged his honesty without knowing the reality of his circumstances. Jonathan reached into his blazer and took out a folded sheet of paper that had clearly been handled often. "Oprah, it's fair to ask that," he replied. "In fact, I brought my financial records for transparency." He held the paper toward the camera. "This is my bank statement from last month. My balance is $1,847. I give away everything except what I need to live." The audience reacted audibly, and Oprah's face went noticeably pale. This information had not been part of her preparation. Jonathan continued, "I still live in the same apartment I've had for 8 years, drive a 15-year-old Honda, and cook most of my meals at home because that's what I can afford." The revelation surprised the entire studio. Jonathan went on. "When Jesus called his disciples, he told them to take nothing for their journey. No money, no extra clothing, no safety net. He said that anyone who wants to follow him must deny themselves and take up their cross. That doesn't mean everyone must live with little, but it does mean our priorities should be in heaven, not in building large personal empires." His words highlighted the contrast between Oprah's commercialized spirituality and the more challenging teachings of Jesus. Oprah's frustration began to show, her voice rising with strain. "That's easy to say when you're receiving admiration for playing one of the most recognizable figures in history. Don't talk to me about humility while you're portraying someone you claim to follow." It was an uncommon moment, Oprah losing her usual control on her own stage. The audience watched closely, surprised by the intensity of her response. Jonathan, however, stayed composed as though he expected this turn. "Oprah, I'm not claiming to be God," Jonathan answered quietly. "I'm portraying a man who claimed to be God and was willing to die for that claim. That distinction matters." He let that thought settle before continuing. "And the attention you mention comes mostly from people searching for meaning, comfort, and the assurance that they are loved. The same people who come to your program seeking the same things." The comparison was direct, and Jonathan saw a moment of recognition in Oprah's eyes. She had built her influence on people's spiritual longing, yet often provided costly alternatives instead of deeper answers. The atmosphere grew heavier as Oprah realized the conversation was shifting away from her. The audience now listened to Jonathan with an attentiveness normally reserved for Oprah herself, drawn by the sincerity of his words. "You know what I think, Jonathan?" Oprah said finally, her tone sharp. "I think you're a religious extremist using faith to feel significant. I think you're dangerous." Her comment sounded less like confidence and more like desperation. But Jonathan's reply would become the defining moment. He stood slowly and the entire studio grew still. "Oprah, 3 days ago I received a call about a little boy named Michael in Detroit. He's 7 years old and battling leukemia." His voice remained controlled but carried clear emotion. "His mother told me he watches The Chosen every day in his hospital room, and it's the one thing that brings him peace. She asked me to speak with him for a few minutes." The studio remained silent, the audience sensing something meaningful was coming. Even Oprah stopped reacting, listening despite herself. "Michael asked me if Jesus really loves children who are sick. If heaven is real. If his parents will be okay when he passes." Jonathan paused, his voice tightening slightly. "I told him yes, Jesus loves him more than he can understand. That heaven is more beautiful than he can imagine. And that his parents will see him again." Many in the audience were now visibly emotional. Jonathan turned directly toward Oprah. "Then Michael asked something that stayed with me. He asked if the lady on TV who talks about God truly knows Jesus, or if she's pretending because she always looked like she was smiling while still feeling sad." The comment stunned Oprah, leaving her unable to respond. A child nearing the end of his life had seen through the appearance. She showed the world with a clarity only innocence can carry. The audience reacted softly, some whispering, many wiping tears, as they absorbed the sincerity behind the boy's words. Jonathan continued, "I told Michael that only God truly knows a person's heart, and that he should pray for anyone who speaks about God on television because it's a serious responsibility. The simplicity of the story quietly revealed the difference between genuine faith and public spirituality. Oprah's hands trembled, her usual confidence fading. "That's emotional manipulation," she said, though her voice lacked strength. She glanced toward her audience and noticed an expression she had never encountered before: disappointment, even pity. For the first time they were seeing her differently, and she clearly felt unsettled. Jonathan shook his head gently. "No, Oprah. That's just a young boy who understands the difference between someone who loves Jesus and someone who uses his name. Children often see things adults overlook because their hearts aren't clouded by pride or ambition." The studio grew so quiet that even the camera hum felt loud. Jonathan reached into his other pocket and pulled out his phone. "Oprah, Michael is watching this show right now from his hospital bed. His mother texted me this morning saying he was excited to see Jesus on TV with the nice lady who helps people." He held out the phone so she could read the message. "Would you like me to call him so you can personally tell him his faith is just imagination? So you can explain to a dying 7-year-old that Jesus is only one option among many, and that his hope might not be real?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Oprah's face turned pale as she understood what the moment required. Here was a child facing death with hope, and she had spent the last half hour challenging the very source of that hope. The audience watched her with growing unease, aware of the weight of what was being asked. I can't," she whispered, barely audible. The admission cut deeply. The woman known for helping others could not bring herself to break a dying child's faith, even though she had been working to undermine that same faith in countless adults. Jonathan spoke softly now, his tone filled with compassion for both truth and the struggle of confronting it. "Oprah, I don't believe you want to harm Michael or anyone else. I think you truly want people to find hope and meaning." He paused, looking at her with gentle seriousness. "But somewhere along the way, I think you began to believe you could improve what Jesus offered, that you could present it better, make it easier, more attractive, even more marketable." His words cut through years of self-justification. "The problem," Jonathan continued, "is that when you try to improve perfection, you end up with something lesser. When you try to make the gospel acceptable to everyone, you often end up with something that helps no one." His voice strengthened. "Jesus didn't come simply to make us feel good. He came to make us new. He didn't come to confirm our choices. He came to transform our hearts. And he didn't come to make us wealthy. He came to make us righteous." Each statement struck at the foundation of Oprah's spiritual approach, and she sat still as her worldview was challenged in real time. The audience watched closely, many with tears, recognizing truth in Jonathan's words. They had spent years and significant money seeking spiritual growth through Oprah's programs, and were now realizing they had been chasing reflections while the substance was elsewhere. Jonathan turned toward them with deep compassion. "You don't need to buy truth," he said. "You don't need to earn love. You don't need to work for enlightenment. Jesus gives all of this freely to anyone who comes with humility and openness." Oprah finally spoke, her voice unsteady. "But what about all the people I've helped? What about the lives that have changed through my work?" The question sounded like someone grappling with the collapse of their identity. Jonathan's expression softened even more. "Oprah, I'm sure you've helped people. Kindness is always meaningful. Encouragement always matters. But helping people feel better about their situations isn't the same as helping them find eternal purpose. Motivating people to believe in themselves isn't the same as introducing them to the one who created them." He continued, "The issue isn't whether you've done good things. The issue is whether you've directed people toward the one who is good. Have you pointed them to the true source of hope? Or have you become a substitute for that source?" The distinction struck deeply. Oprah's face tightened as she absorbed the truth. For years she had placed herself as the provider of hope, wisdom, and spiritual insight, becoming the destination instead of the guide. The realization was painful. Silence filled the room as Oprah struggled with the meaning of Jonathan's words. Finally, in a small, fragile voice, she asked the question that changed everything. "What if you're right? What if I've been wrong about all of it?" The vulnerability in her words was startling. This was Oprah Winfrey, one of the most influential figures in the world, considering the possibility that her entire body of work might have been built on an unstable foundation. The audience remained completely silent, aware that they were witnessing something rare in television history. Jonathan responded immediately, and his tone carried genuine hope. The same grace that saved a struggling actor from New York can also reach a media leader from Chicago. The same Jesus who forgave the woman at the well can forgive anyone who approaches him sincerely. He stepped a little closer to her chair. Oprah, what's remarkable about Jesus is that he doesn't expect you to have everything figured out before coming to him. He meets you where you are, takes your mistakes and burdens, and creates something meaningful from them. His offer of grace lingered in the studio, like a lifeline extended to someone overwhelmed by their own circumstances. Then came the moment that would later circulate across social media and be discussed for years. Oprah Winfrey, known as the Queen of Daytime Television, rose from her seat and walked toward Jonathan Roumie. Without speaking, she knelt beside him, tears falling freely as years of self-dependence faded away. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to stop being in control." It was an honest confession, and the audience watched quietly as their larger-than-life host revealed struggles similar to their own. Jonathan knelt next to her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "That's exactly where Jesus wants you," he said calmly. "At the point where you realize you can't rely on yourself anymore. That's where all of us begin." He looked out toward the audience, many wiping tears. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." He meant those who recognize their spiritual need, those who understand they have nothing to offer except their honesty. In that setting, the message felt especially significant. The idea that acknowledging weakness can be the beginning of true strength. "Oprah," Jonathan asked gently, "would you like me to pray with you?" A simple question, yet it represented a major turning point, the willingness to surrender control and acknowledge need. Oprah nodded, unable to speak through her tears. As Jonathan began to pray, something changed in the studio. The usual performance aspect disappeared, and for the first time in Harpo Studios' history, a sincere moment of worship unfolded. "Jesus," Jonathan prayed, "here is your daughter Oprah. She's tired of trying to be strong enough, smart enough, successful enough. She wants to know you, not just know about you." The prayer was straightforward, free of dramatic language or techniques. As he prayed, Oprah cried openly, not the controlled tears of someone in front of a camera, but the deep crying of a heart being opened. She mourned the years spent building barriers instead of seeking connection with God, and promoting spiritual products instead of spiritual truth. The audience watched in quiet amazement, and many began praying alongside them. When the prayer ended, Oprah stayed on her knees for a moment, hesitant to return to a life she suddenly saw differently. Eventually, she looked up at Jonathan with eyes reflecting a humility she hadn't shown in years. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Jonathan smiled kindly, the look of someone who had walked a similar path. "Now you learn to walk with Jesus instead of trying to improve on what he already offers. Now you learn that being his child is far better than trying to take his place." The change in her expression was noticeable. The tension was gone, replaced by the calm of someone who had finally stopped resisting. As the show wrapped up, there was no music or celebration, only the quiet respect of people who sensed they had witnessed something important. Oprah slowly stood, her legs unsteady from the emotional weight of the moment. She looked at her audience differently, not as consumers, but as people seeking the same grace she had just experienced. "I don't know what this means for the show, for my business, for anything," she said honestly. "But I know I can't return to pretending I have every answer when I've just realized I've been asking the wrong questions." The admission was brave, and the audience responded with a gentle, respectful applause. In the days that followed, she made a decision that surprised the entertainment world. She announced that she would end her spiritual empowerment programs and close the commercial empire she built around New Age ideas. "I've been giving people what they wanted to hear instead of what they needed," she said in a straightforward video message. "I've been pointing them toward themselves instead of pointing them toward their savior." The financial cost was considerable. Large portions of her revenue disappeared. But for the first time in years, Oprah said she felt a deep peace, one that came from choosing truth instead of profit. 6 months later, a small news piece appeared, mostly unnoticed, but it brought tears to Jonathan's eyes. Oprah had started visiting children's hospitals without cameras or promotion, just to spend time with sick children and their families. She read to them, prayed with them, and shared the hope she had found. One of those children was Michael from Detroit, who had outlived medical expectations and proudly told people, "Miss Oprah found Jesus too, just like me." The impact of that day continued to grow, touching people in ways no program or commercial product ever had. Oprah's transformation came with real cost. She lost business partners, casual supporters, and those who preferred a diluted version of spirituality. But she gained something far greater, an authentic relationship with the God she had once reshaped for mass appeal. When people asked her about the change, she would simply say, "I thought I was successful when I had what I wanted. I learned I was successful when I wanted what God wanted." The statement was simple but represented a significant shift from self-reliance to faith. Today, Jonathan and Oprah continue their work, but with different motivations and a new foundation. Jonathan still plays Jesus on screen, but with a deeper understanding of grace. Oprah still influences millions, but now directs them toward the true source of hope instead of positioning herself as that source. Their meeting that day became a defining moment, not just for them but for everyone who saw it. A reminder that no one is beyond the reach of genuine faith. The video of their exchange has been viewed more than 500 million times. Not because it was dramatic but because it was authentic. In a world filled with confusion and commercialized spirituality, people recognized real truth when they saw it. Messages poured in from viewers worldwide who said that Oprah's humility encouraged them to release their own pride. One of the most memorable comments came from a woman who wrote, "I watched the most successful person I knew admit she needed a savior. If Oprah can humble herself before Jesus, then maybe I can too." The story continues to influence lives, doing far more than any high-priced program ever could. Sometimes the greatest changes happen not when we finally get the answers, but when we realize we've been asking the wrong questions. If this story moved you, maybe it's time to ask the same question Oprah asked. What happens now? The answer remains simple. Take the next step toward the one who has been waiting for you, arms open, grace ready, and love without limit. If you believe some truths are worth standing for at any cost, hit the subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs it. And tell us in the comments, what would you have said to Oprah in that moment?